Deep in the heart of West Africa, an invisible war is unfolding, not with weapons, but with economic pressure, political isolation, and strategic isolation. What if the man trying to unite the Sahel against colonial control is actually being targeted by his own neighbors, and the world barely knows it? Ibrahim Traoré didn't seize power in Burkina Faso through mere chance or luck. When he took control in 2022, he represented something radical for the region. A leader openly defiant of Western influence, determined to reclaim Burkina Faso's sovereignty, and willing to challenge the established order. He became the face of a new Africa, one that rejected the old playbook of foreign intervention and economic dependency. But in geopolitics, visibility comes with a price. And right now, Traoré is paying it. The pressure isn't coming from far-off Western capitals, though some certainly wish him gone. It's coming from closer to home. Chad, one of Burkina Faso's neighbors and a nation long considered more sympathetic to Western interests, has become increasingly central to what observers and analysts are describing as a coordinated campaign against Traoré's government. But here's where this gets complicated. The evidence is frustratingly vague. There are reports, whispered allegations, political discussions in obscure forums. Journalists have documented the tensions. Analysts have mapped the patterns. Yet no smoking gun exists. No official statement confirms a coordinated effort. No leaked documents prove the conspiracy outright. This ambiguity is precisely what makes the situation so dangerous and so revealing about how modern power works in Africa. Let's understand what's actually happening. The pressure on Traoré's Burkina Faso isn't monolithic. It operates across multiple fronts simultaneously, which is the signature of a well-coordinated campaign. Trade routes are being complicated. Agricultural flows are being disrupted. Economic pressure is mounting in ways that are difficult to trace back to any single actor. Yet the pattern is undeniable. Chad, positioned as a regional player, appears to be playing a particular role in this apparatus. Some analysts describe it bluntly. Chad functions as a Western proxy in the region. This doesn't necessarily mean CIA operatives are running operations from N'Djamena. It's more subtle than that. It means that Chad's interests and Western interests happen to align. It means that when Washington or Paris prefers certain regional outcomes, Chad often finds itself pursuing those same objectives. Whether through diplomatic pressure, economic leverage, or security cooperation, Chad has become a vector through which certain powers can exert influence on the Sahel without direct, visible intervention. From Traoré's perspective, and from the perspective of those analyzing his situation, this is profoundly destabilizing. He's trying to build something unprecedented in the region, the Alliance of Sahel States, or ES. This is his grand vision, a unified coalition of Sahelian nations, stronger together, capable of resisting external pressures and solving their own problems without foreign meddling. Mali joined him. Niger joined him. Together, they were forging a new bloc with genuine potential to reshape the balance of power in West Africa. But that vision requires a stable, unified Burkina Faso at its core. And that's exactly what those pressuring Traoré are trying to prevent. Here's where things get interesting. The actual mechanisms of this pressure are remarkably difficult to pin down. There are rumors that external actors want to destabilize Traoré's government. There are claims that he's facing coordinated political isolation. There are suggestions, just suggestions, mind you, that some parties would prefer to see him removed from power altogether. But when you dig deeper, when you ask for specifics, when you demand evidence, suddenly everything becomes speculative. It all becomes circumstantial. The reports circulating through political circles mention sabotage. They mention efforts to create internal instability. They mention regime change considerations. But these are not confirmed. These are not officially documented. They exist in that murky space between intelligence assessment and conspiracy theory, where patterns that seem obvious to some observers appear entirely circumstantial to others. This ambiguity is intentional. It's a feature, not a bug, of how pressure is applied in modern geopolitics. Because here's the reality. If Chad openly blockaded Burkina Faso's agricultural exports, there would be clear evidence, a paper trail, international condemnation, and potential retaliatory measures. But if trade barriers mysteriously increase, if border complications arise, if economic interactions become more complicated, who's responsible? Who can you point to and say definitively, you did this? The diffusion of responsibility is the entire point. It's plausible deniability at a national scale. But let's step back and see the bigger picture here. Why would anyone go to such lengths to pressure Traoré? The answer matters because it reveals something profound about the geopolitical order that Africa is challenging. Burkina Faso is a resource-rich nation with significant mineral wealth. It's strategically positioned in a region of immense global interest. The Sahel has become a flashpoint for competing visions of how the future of Africa should look. On one side, you have external powers that have long benefited from influence over African states, the ability to shape policies, secure favorable trade agreements, ensure military bases, and maintain geopolitical leverage. For them, Traoré represents a dangerous precedent. Here is a leader saying no. Here is a leader building alliances that exclude them. Here is a leader actively working to consolidate African sovereignty in ways that marginalize external control. On the other side, you have actors like Traoré who see the only path forward as genuine independence. He's not anti-Western in the crude, cartoonish sense. He's simply asserting that Burkina Faso's interests come first, and that sometimes those interests conflict with external preferences. This is reasonable. This is normal. Yet for actors dependent on influence, it's revolutionary and threatening. This is why the pressure exists. This is why Chad's role matters. This is why the rumors and reports, vague as they are, tell a true story even without documentary proof. Now we need to be precise here, because precision matters when discussing geopolitical allegations. What do we actually know with certainty? We know that Traoré has consolidated significant support within Burkina Faso. We know that he's formed the AES alliance with Mali and Niger. We know that this alliance has explicitly rejected French military presence and reclaimed sovereignty over national resources. We know that economic tensions exist in the region. We know that relationships between Chad and its neighbors have become strained. These are facts. What we don't have are explicit confirmations from official channels that Chad is deliberately targeting Burkina Faso through coordinated economic and political sabotage. We don't have documents proving a unified campaign orchestrated by Western powers to destabilize Traoré. These claims exist in reporting and analysis, but they remain unconfirmed allegations rather than established facts. This distinction matters profoundly, both for accuracy and for understanding how information operates in geopolitical contexts. Yet the absence of official confirmation doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means something is happening in the shadows, and we're trying to read it through fragments and patterns. To understand Chad's position, you have to understand Chad's own precarious situation. Chad is a nation with its own internal fragilities, its own struggles with security, its own economic challenges. It's not a monolithic actor making purely strategic calculations. It's a nation where multiple power centers exist, where international partnerships matter for survival, and where the choice to align with certain powers over others has real consequences. When we say Chad's role appears aligned with Western interests, we're not necessarily saying Chad is coerced or controlled. We're saying that Chad's leadership has made decisions that happen to serve those interests. This could be because they see genuine benefits. It could be because they fear the alternative. It could be a combination of both. The point is that Chad has become a node in a network that extends its influence into the Sahel. And in that network, there are certain actors who would prefer Traoré's vision doesn't succeed. Agricultural pressure is particularly significant because the Sahel's economy depends crucially on agricultural output and trade. If Chad restricts agricultural flows or complicates trade routes, the impact on Burkina Faso's economy is direct and measurable. Traoré's government has legitimacy in part because it's promised to improve the lives of ordinary Burkinabe people. Economic disruption undermines that promise. It creates space for dissent. It potentially opens pathways for rivals or alternative leaders. Over time, sustained economic pressure can destabilize even the most determined regime. This is the power of the shadow campaign. It doesn't require armies or coups. It requires patience, coordination, and the willingness to inflict economic pain until political will breaks. But here's what complicates the entire narrative. Ibrahim Traoré has proven to be a remarkably assertive and strong leader. This is not a man easily broken by economic pressure or political isolation. He hasn't backed down when faced with French military withdrawal demands. He hasn't softened his anti-colonial rhetoric. He hasn't sought reconciliation with actors he views as representing neo-colonial control. If anything, the pressure has hardened his resolve and strengthened his standing among those who see him as genuinely committed to African sovereignty. This creates a paradox for those hoping to destabilize him. The tactics that might work against a weaker or more compromising leader may actually strengthen him. Every trade barrier, every moment of isolation, every rumor about external pressure, all of it feeds the narrative that he's under siege precisely because his vision threatens powerful interests. It becomes validation of his worldview. It becomes proof that his approach is right. Consider this. If Traoré were secretly meeting with French officials, if he were accepting conditional aid from Western powers, if he were making concessions on sovereignty, he would lose legitimacy precisely among the constituency that supports him most. The pressure isn't weakening him because he's using it as evidence of his commitment. He's turned the attack into a shield. What's unfolding in Burkina Faso, Chad, and across the AES alliance isn't just a regional squabble. It's a test case for how African sovereignty assertiveness will be managed in the coming decades. Will nations that say no to external control face coordinated pressure until they back down? Or will they find ways to sustain themselves and their vision despite isolation? The stakes are genuinely enormous. If Traoré and the AES can consolidate power and demonstrate that unified African action can resist external pressure and deliver prosperity, it changes the entire calculus of African politics. Other nations watch. Other leaders consider whether they too might assert greater independence. The regional balance shifts. The global order feels the tremors. Conversely, if Traoré faces sustained pressure, economic disruption, and growing instability, if the model of African sovereignty resistance ultimately fails, then the message is clear. Western-aligned actors will win. The old playbook will endure. External powers will continue to shape African futures through proxies and pressure rather than direct intervention. The system remains intact. This is why Chad matters. This is why the pressure matters. This is why even unconfirmed rumors of coordination are significant. Because in geopolitics, the threat of pressure is often as powerful as its actual application. Actors respond to what they fear might happen, not just what has definitively occurred. Let's name what's being alleged. Even though we acknowledge these claims lack official confirmation, it's said that certain parties would prefer Traoré's removal. It suggested that coordinated efforts to create political instability are underway. It's reported that trade and agricultural mechanisms are being weaponized. It's speculated that external actors see his government as incompatible with their interests. Some of these allegations are more credible than others based on pattern analysis and historical precedent. We know that Western powers have orchestrated regime changes in Africa before. We know that economic pressure has been used as a political tool. We know that proxies have been employed to serve broader strategic interests. So the allegation that this might be happening again isn't inherently implausible. It's consistent with historical practice. Yet consistency with historical patterns is not the same as proof that it's happening now. This distinction matters both ethically and analytically. We can acknowledge that the allegations are plausible, that the incentives for pressure exist, that the mechanisms for pressure are available, all without claiming definitive knowledge that a conspiracy is underway. The safest interpretation is this. Whether or not a formal, coordinated campaign exists, the pressure on Traoré's government is real. It's felt in trade disruptions. It's experienced in international isolation. It's reflected in the economic challenges Burkina Faso faces. Whether this pressure is deliberate or emergent, coordinated or incidental, the effect on Burkina Faso's leadership and population is largely the same. What deserves attention is what Traoré is actually building rather than just the pressure he's facing. The AES isn't a minor regional initiative. It's a serious attempt to create a Sahelian bloc with genuine strategic depth. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso together represent a substantial population, significant resource wealth, and crucial geographic positioning. Together, they're harder to ignore. Together, they're harder to pressure. Together, they represent an alternative to the existing power structure. This is why the bloc matters to those trying to constrain Traoré. As long as he remains isolated, his options are limited. As long as Burkina Faso stands alone against pressure, it's vulnerable. But if the AES solidifies, if Mali and Niger remain committed to the coalition, if other nations join, the calculus changes entirely. Suddenly, you're not dealing with a single recalcitrant nation. You're dealing with a movement. And movements are fundamentally harder to suppress than individual actors. Here's the uncomfortable truth that geopolitical analysis often obscures. We may not know the full story for years or even decades. We may never get documentary proof of exactly what was attempted or how. Intelligence operations are designed to remain hidden. Economic pressure is often indirect and diffuse. Political pressure operates through multiple channels that don't leave clear traces. But we can read the situation through its effects. We can map the patterns. We can understand the incentives and see how actors respond to them. We can make reasoned inferences even without absolute certainty. This isn't the same as proof, but it's how serious geopolitical analysis actually works. You're always working with incomplete information, trying to construct a coherent understanding from fragments and patterns. What we can say with confidence is this: Burkina Faso faces real pressure from multiple directions. Chad plays a role in that pressure, whether deliberately or incidentally. Traoré faces genuine threats to his government's stability, yet he's proven remarkably resilient, using the pressure itself as a source of legitimacy. The AES represents his attempt to transform a weakness, isolation, into a strength through regional coalition. As we look ahead, several questions become crucial. Will the AES survive and expand, or will it fracture under pressure? Will Traoré maintain his assertive leadership, or will sustained economic pressure eventually force compromises? Will the model of African sovereignty resistance prove sustainable, or is it ultimately too costly? The answers to these questions will reverberate far beyond the Sahel. They'll shape whether other African nations feel emboldened to assert greater independence, or whether they conclude that accommodation with external powers is safer. They'll determine whether the architecture of global power, in which certain nations have outsized influence over African futures, begins to erode or persists fundamentally unchanged. And they'll determine whether Ibrahim Traoré becomes a footnote in African history, a brief moment of defiance ultimately suppressed, or whether he becomes the figure who opened a new chapter in which African nations genuinely determined their own destinies. The pressure he faces suggests that powerful actors believe the latter outcome is possible. Otherwise, they wouldn't bother. The rumors and allegations, real or not, are a vote of confidence in Traoré's potential. In the shadows of the Sahel, an invisible struggle continues. Its outcome remains uncertain, but its significance is absolute. Because what's ultimately at stake isn't just Burkina Faso's political future or Chad's regional role. It's nothing less than the question of whether Africa's future will be determined by Africans or by external powers channeling pressure through proxy actors. And in that struggle, every trade barrier, every rumor, every moment of isolation becomes a battle in a war that the world barely acknowledges is happening. The real question isn't whether Traoré will survive. The real question is whether the vision he represents, genuine African sovereignty, unified regional power, resistance to external control, can survive. Because if it does, everything changes. And if it doesn't, everything stays the same. Which future awaits depends on decisions being made right now, in the shadows, in the corridors of power in Chad, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and far beyond. The world is watching, even if most don't realize what they're looking at.